Hello everyone, my name is Mad Scorpion and welcome to Helldivers 2, going over the major patch, otherwise known as patch 1.001.0, which is the broad patch. I don't know if this is the end of their 60-day adjustment plan that they announced, but essentially this is a large portion of bug fixes, reworks to enemies, as well as buffs to weapons and changing of how the game works at a function value. Now there's a large bit of words here, but they go over some of the changes they made throughout the thing. So going back into the generals and the actual details. So previously, partial damage, which if you don't know, that is when you penetrate armor, but just barely. To give an idea, a Devastator had armor that could be penned by medium, but at the same time, if you hit the chest or just some random part, it would only do that partial damage just because you just penned it, while something with heavy would do full. This case, they deal 50% of damage previously, now adjusted to increase partial damage to 65% of full damage to address the issue of it being, just not so effective. Now, Helldivers also take less damage from headshots, going down from 100% extra damage to only 50%, but in mitigation, they did increase some damage on different areas depending on the hit, so this hopefully reduces the instances of being melted by automatons and random bugs that hit your head and are more appropriate damages. Now, going for the Liberator and Liberator Carbine, they increase its damage from 60 to 70. The durable damage is increased from 14 to 17, which is damage to durable parts that can be broken, like the Charger's rear in some instances. The stagger force is increased from 10 to 15, so it staggers more often. The maximum spare magazines was increased by 1 up to 8, and the starting spare magazines was increased from 5 to 6. So just all around damage and ammo buff for the Liberator and Liberator Carbine. The Knight SMG, its damage is increased from 50 to 65. Its durable damage also increased from 5 to 7. And magazines now fully refill when picking up a single resupply with some reduced recoil. I'd imagine the Knight was heavily ignored. The Liberator Concussive, the explosive variant of the Liberator, now comes with a drum magazine instead, which holds 60 rounds. The number of mags has been reduced from 10 to 6, but doing 6x6 you still hold 360 rounds. The number of mags have been reduced due to, again, larger mag capacity. So is this more than what you had originally? If I recall, they only hold 20 rounds, so I think it's more total, but regardless, more crowd control with the Liberator Concussive. The Tenderizer, the number of rounds in the magazine has been increased from 30 to 35, and the Start Command has increased from 4 to 5, so more damage and more total ammo. The Breaker itself now comes with an extended magazine which holds 16 shells, and the stagger force increased from 10 to 15. They slated that it has been returned to its former glory, which, according to them, I do believe that. The Breaker is now in play. And speaking of play, the Spray and Pray version of the Breaker now has a duckbill magazine duckbill muzzle, making it spread very horizontal but less vertical. Its total damage has also been increased from 92 to 240, so that should be a little bit more effective. Now, some changes they did to broad lasers in a total, but starting with the Scythe, the basic laser, which I think either that or the automatic one, I forget specifically, but the Scythe. The cooldown is now faster. They adjusted the heat visual effects, and the scope changed to a low-powered scope with removed recoil totally, and you set enemies on fire faster, which I actually didn't know in a previous patch that lasers will set enemies on fire, so that is faster. The crossbow, its explosive damage radius was increased by 50% in total, and the explosive damage itself has been increased from 150 to 350. Then the Eruptor, its shrapnel projectiles are back, amount set to 30, the shrapnel damage is set to 110, and the explosive damage decreased from 340 to 225. Now, shrapnel is back. They heard our feedback and reintroduced the shrapnel. We have replaced the original shrapnel with the frag grenade shrapnel to no longer instantly one-shot Helldivers, with the exception of the occasional unlucky headshot. We also increased the amount of shrapnel. And the explosive radius itself was increased by 33%, 17% for inner radius, and 50% for outer radius. Then with the Defender Submachine Gun, damage increased from 70 to 75, and durable damage is increased from 7 to 8, so it's just a little bit more peppy. The Liberator Penetrator was increased damage from 45 to 60, which I heard in the note from the devs themselves when in their full patch. The Liberator Penetrator is now acting in the damage scale that the original Liberator is working now, so both of them have increased slightly. The Diligence and Counter Sniper variants on marksman rifles. Damage increased from 125 to 165, and durable damage increased from 32 to 42. The Counter Sniper variant, the damage was increased from 140 to 200, and the durable damage from 14 to 50, so it can pop butts quicker. There's no good way to say that. Stagger Force also increased from 15 to 20. The Blitzer now has a weak stun effect that builds up per shot on its targets. And I will mention it did get some buffs that I'll go over more that goes with the Arc Thrower because they all filter into one similar thing. Now the Torture, the Flamethrower primary, its damage is increased by 50%. And the Flamer mechanics have reverted to before the Escalation of Freedom update, and the armor penetration from 3 to 4, so they can cook heavy targets like Hulks and Chargers. The Sidearms, going with the Peacemaker, they gave it an extra spare magazine, so more total ammo. The Dagger gains heat more slowly, it has no more recoil, the damage increased from 200 to 250. It also sets enemies on fire faster and adjusted to the heat visual effects. Now the Crisper, the Flamethrower pistol, damage also increased by 50%. Its flame mechanics also reverted and armor penetration also increased. So if you wanted to do a Flamer pistol against Hulks, you can. Now for the support weapons, they've reworked how anti-tank works in a lot of ways, so I'll do my best to cover all this as they describe. So they dedicated anti-tank weapons like the recoilless rifle, the Quasar laser cannon, the Commando rocket launcher, expendable anti-tank launcher, spear launcher, and the patriotic exosuit. All have received significant damage boosts to increase their effectiveness. Now they fall into 3 categories. Strong and reliable anti-tank includes the recoilless rifle and spear, and they can afford to be less accurate when firing at armored targets, since most hits will eliminate the enemies the size of a Charger. Then strong will be things like the expendable anti-tank and Quasar, while highly effective, often killing targets to a single hit spot, otherwise 2 solid shots to handle a Charger or 1 shot for a Hulk. And there's less strong like the Commando and Patriot exosuit rockets, typically require 1 to 3 shots to take down a Charger or a Hulk, depending on your aim. They basically categorize like will always take down heavy targets in the form of strong and reliable. They will always, if you're accurate and strong, and less strong is you have to be accurate and hit them a few times. Now the grenade launcher, it got an extra belt, so it has more ammo from start, and max spare magazines increased from 2 to 3, and explosion radius was slightly increased. The laser cannon, the cooldown is slightly faster. They removed its recoil, it set enemies on fire faster, and can now damage heavier enemies like Chargers, Bile Titans, Impalers, and Hulks, in case you want the laser cannon to deal with everything in the field instead of just the medium targets. And they also adjusted the heat visual effects in association. Now the arc thrower. Its range was increased from 35 to 55, now has a Monarch Sun effect that builds up on targets and jumps additional times. Its durable damage was increased from 50 to 100. Now keep in mind, the increase in jumps also counts to friends, so it may be more lethal than ever to your friendlies. The Railgun. Durable damage increased from 60 to 225, so breaking things. And fully overcharged damage increased from 150 to 250. This is unsafe mode, so unsafe mode is more than, incentivized now. The Stalwart Machine Gun. It was said to use the same caliber of round as the Liberator assault rifle, so the damage is increased from 60 to 70. The durable damage increased from 14 to 17, and the stagger force increased from 10 to 15. The basic machine gun, it got more stagger force from 15 to 20. The material rifle, or the anti-material rifle, durable damage increased from 135 to 180. It can now damage the heavier enemies like the Chargers, Bile Titans, Impalers, and Hulks, aka heavy armored enemies, and its stagger force was increased from 20 to 25. Now, the heavy machine gun, this sounds fun. Its stagger force was increased from 20 to 25, and again can now damage the heavy enemies like Chargers and Bile Titans. That will be a fun visual. For the Commando, the demolition strength against structures have been reduced. It can no longer destroy automaton factories in a single shot. However, since the fabricators can now have health, it can still take them out with 2 shots, which is an interesting thing they mentioned. They now have health, so more things can break them more easily. The Flamethrower. Damage buff increased by 33%. The mechanics have been reverted, as well as increased armor penetration like before, and can also damage enemies like Chargers, Bile Titans, Impalers, and Hulks. So a flamethrower with a fight with a Hulk is possible. Now the autocannon also can damage enemies like Chargers, Bile Titans, Impalers, and Hulks. Now I want to specify as well with these can now damage, while it may not be recommended, it is possible. So if it is your last resort, it can work, but I wouldn't recommend it as your primary option. For some grenades, the frag grenades, shrapnel damage increased by roughly 50%, max ammo increased from 4 to 5, so you can hold 5 on average, and refill increased from 2 to 3 per crate. The explosion radius also increased. And then for the thermite grenade, explosion damage increased from 100 to 2000, shorter time until it ignites the thermite, and time until it explodes slightly reduced. However, you do lose 1 in terms of total ammo. Then again, this is chunky anti-armor. So for some stratagems, each stratagem is capable of damaging heavily armored enemies, has had their damage increased to account for the increased health of heavier enemies. The goal with this change is to have the stratagems on a similar or higher power level than before. In addition to that, we will have made the following changes as well. So with the Eagle 500 kilogram, its explosion radius was increased to match its visuals more consistently. Eagle rockets got damage slightly increased. The Gatling Sentry has more stagger from 15 to 20. The Machine Gun Sentry, same sort of buff. The Tesla Tower now staggers enemies to match the force done by other arc weapons, and now has a moderate stun effect that builds up on hit per target, but again, chain farther against your friendlies. The Heavy Machine Gun Emplacement, the stagger force was increased from 20 to 25, and you can now damage enemies like the Chargers and Bile Titans. The Patriot Exosuit, the Gatling Stagger Force, was also increased for the heavier enemies. The Emancipator Exosuit, aka the Autocannon Exosuit. The autocannon durable damage is increased from 60 to 150, so it cracks armor better. And the rate of fire on the weapon was increased from 125 to 175, and associated, instead of getting 150 rounds per exosuit, you now get 200 rounds per exosuit. The Orbital Laser, its damage was slightly increased, shockingly enough, and the Orbital Rail Cannon, same thing, so it can hopefully consistently take out things like Impalers and Bile Titans, just in case, because there has been 1 or 2 cases where Rail Cannons haven't taken them out. Then for the Orbital Gas Strike, we're reworking the gas gameplay mechanics to avoid becoming more crowd control focused in preparation for the Chemical Agent's Warbond. So the gas effect has been reworked to cause blindness and confuse enemies and Helldivers alike at the expense of reduced damage over time. I'm a fan of Orbital Gas Strike, so I don't know how that's going to work. Blindness and confusion sounds good because, again, crowd control, but I was a fan of dropping it on bug breaches and just killing anything that came out that was small and dealing with the big things otherwise. So I'll just have to see how that goes. Now, some changes in general. The new Galactic War feature, the Galactic War Map, can now display the location of strategically important assets, so it'll make it easier for Helldivers to take them into consideration when deciding on next moves. As well as an Emote Wheel feature. Players can now equip up to 4 emotes in the armory and access them by using the new Emote Wheel feature by holding the Emote button. Additional separate key bindings options are available with the emote in the settings. Then added Dolby Atmos support on PS5, whatever that means, and for enemies. Now this is some of the important stuff. The Automaton Fabricators, they have health and armor in addition to their existing destruction system. This means that while they may have high armor penetration, weapons can still destroy them and may take multiple hits to do so depending on the weapon used. So they also added effects to clearly showcase the health state. So you can use things like recoilless rifles just from any angle, I imagine, to one-tap them. Things like commandos, as I mentioned, will take more than one shot. But otherwise, if you have something that can do damage to them, just keep that in mind. You don't always have to get the angle on them. You can just shoot it sometimes. Now the armor for Hulks. Their armor has reduced from 4 to 5, so you can now armor pen them more consistently. The back weak spot is slightly more durable, but the back weak spot health is decreased from 1,000 to 800. So I imagine that means for some weapons it may take more rounds because they are lower caliber. They're lower caliber, but otherwise it will be popping easier. The Hulk Bruiser. Replace a rocket launcher for an energy-based cannon. Increases how frequently the Hulk Bruiser shoots to avoid ragdolling more often, I believe they mentioned. The tank themselves reduced, the front armor was increased from 5 to 6, so I imagine it'll be easier to hit them from the sides or the back. The Berserker Hulk, the head health reduced from 150 to 125. The main health is reduced from 1,000 to 750. The abdomen is now a weak spot, and the chainsaw damage has been increased. So the melee enemies, I almost thought that was the Hulks, but the melee chainsaw wielding bots are a little bit weaker, but they do more damage. Now, all versions of the Devastators, their max health was reduced from 800 to 750, but the Devastators now flinch when hit, causing their aim to worsen, similar to conscripts. The intent is to make them easier to manage if you're applying damage. Now, a big change, the Rocket Devastators. They now have a limited number of rockets, and you can see them disappear when they are spent. They added a reload mechanic from their backpack to replenish their rockets at once. The rocket physics, collision is smaller, making them easier to avoid. Now keep in mind, this also goes, they are limited. You will see them reload, and supposedly they have a backpack that you can also target if you're looking for additional weak spots. The gunships, they also have a similar thing. They have a limited amount of rockets, and rocket collision is smaller, making them easier to avoid. So imagine gunships are just less oppressive in total. Now, changes for all versions of the Chargers. The Behemoth and Spore, I believe, are included. The armor has been reduced from 5 to 4, so more things can kill them. The butt weak spot health is decreased from 110 or 1100 to 950, so it's weaker, and the weak spot in the butt is slightly less durable. The belly armor, if you can get there, is low to 2 things, so if you can, practically everything can damage it, if you can get under there. A damage multiplier has been added to the Charger's exposed flesh at the main body, now dealing 300% damage. So if you have something like an expendable anti-tank and crack the side armor, that is a good weak spot to go for if you're looking for options and have nothing that can crack armor yourself. Now turn slightly slower when charging and moving normally. Now charge less often, but however, the charge damage was increased by 50% and side attack damage increased also by 50%. So they are slightly more lethargic, but more powerful. As well, the Charge Behemoth, the buck weak spot is also reduced health from 1200 to 950. The Hunter itself, the health is reduced from 175 to 160. The Scavenger's health is reduced from 80 to 60. And the Bile Titan, it got an armor reduction so more things can attack it. They reworked the Bile Titan's belly gameplay. I believe that means it is a little bit tougher. Here, belly armor is reduced from 4 to 2, so it is more weak at specifically the belly. They introduced a separate belly health pool once the outer belly layer has been destroyed, and destroying the exposed belly pool kills the Bile Titan. So if you have weak armor, you can, or weak anti-penetration, or anti-armor, I should say, you can now kill any Bile Titan at any time. You just have to aim for the belly, in addition to having that mechanic where breaking the belly actually keeps it from spewing acid. The Impaler, again, armor reduction to be more applicable to more weapon variety. And previously, the Impaler could only retract its tentacles once during its lifetime when threatened. Now it can do it several times. Its tentacles pursue you over a shorter distance from the Impaler and prioritize players nearer to the Impaler. And the Impaler can't see the enemy, it will retract its periods after a brief time. Thank you, this is so annoying. I literally had a case yesterday where I was 100 meter away from the Impaler. It was still sending out tentacles after me. It was so annoying. Now, the tentacles themselves. The damage is increased, but reduced camera shake on tentacle attack, and the tentacles require less damage inflicted on them to retract. So they should ragdoll less and take less damage, which made sense. It took like 10 shotgun shells to make one reduce, and I think that was with flame damage. Now for planets and modifiers. The intense heat and extreme cold modifiers are no longer static throughout the entire mission, and now change based on the time of day or different weather conditions. Oh, that's nice. Imagine blizzard planets would get increasingly cold at nighttime. Some desert planets will now only have the intense heat modifier active during the day. This means that during the night on the planet will have no active modifier, or in some cases have the extreme cold modifier. That makes sense. Arid planets, similar to Hellmire, will now only have the intense heat modifier active during fire tornado storms. That actually sounds like a logical fix. Now fixes. Fix per weapon aim mode not saving correctly. Note this patch will clear all the saved aim modes, but everything should work consistently afterwards. I think I noticed this when my cookout was consistently dropping and having me first person aim. So some crash fixes and soft locks. Let's see. Crashed that would occur if shutting down the game during boot. Caused by players with unique skins timing out. When vehicle skins were not properly synced. When caused by players leaving the game shortly after being reinforced while using unique Hellpod skins. A rare crash occurred by Bile Spewers attacks. A crash when interacting with the Galactic War hologram. A crash when joining another player's Super Destroyer. A crash that could happen when you are participating in secondary objectives. When booting the game on PlayStation 5 with an unscripted systems language such as French Canadian. Fix a potential crash with a new player hot join. Potential crash when players leaving the game. And rare crash when using the hologram map and looking at the operations. You should no longer crash when interacting with the Galactic Warp map when an update is required. Fix a rare crash that can occur when joining a game section that is cycled through at least 32 unique players. Interesting. Fix an issue where objective stratagems cannot be completed if host migration happens. Fix an issue where already joined players would be kicked out when other players join the game. Fixed a bug where closing the Steam overlay in the middle of the super credits purchase would stay in a broken state. For any purchase after that, it previously needed a game restart to work again. Oh, excuse me. Fixed inaccessibility shuttles after hosts leaving the game right before its landing. Fixed soft lock during mission summary if the host left the game, and fixed an issue where emotes would not exit properly if you cancel them during a sprint. Now some social menu fixes. Fixes to the PlayStation 5 friends list. Miscellaneous fixes the evacuate high value citizens objective. Fixed an issue where enemies would spawn on top of the extraction. Fixed an issue that enemies can no longer shoot generators from spawn points or from far away. Fixed an enemy pathing where they would sometimes try to enter the base from the mountain on the side. Added more protection for the generators to prevent enemies from shooting them far away. Heavy and flying enemies now prioritize attacking the player before the generators and the gates. And fixed an issue where enemies would stop spawning for a brief period of time when the host leaves the mission. The conduct geological survey objective. Fixed an issue and conduct that mission where the seismic probe would become inoperable if a player called it in and left the game or disconnected, and also tweaked enemy spawns. For the Impaler, fixed a bug where Impalers didn't receive explosion damages if there were exposed weak areas. Fixed Impaler tentacles not being pingable. Interesting. The three following instances have been largely resolved, and the players are now mostly fixed. Although rare occurrences may still happen with the Impaler in exception cases, they will be slightly less common. Now, fixed an issue where standing near the Impaler's head during the tentacle retraction would cause Helldivers to be launched high into the air. Fixed an issue where the tentacles spawning beneath players could occasionally launch Helldivers in the air. Yep, that's happened to me. It fixed a bug where the Impaler's tentacles could sometimes launch the exosuits into the air when the player was inside. Now, fixed enemies not receiving damage properly when more than 10 meters away from the player. Fixed issue where the Bile Titan sometimes not take damage to the head. Fixed issue causing most weapons to shoot below the crosshair when using aimed on sight. Fixed an issue where high breaker drill might become accessible after being called in. Where first-person view was misaligned with the weapon sights when using the ballistic shield stratagem. Heavy machine gun scope is no longer misaligned. Lens cutting issues in scopes. A fixed bug where multiple confidential data pickups could spawn in the same stronghold when only one is intended. Fixed two-person emotes when getting stuck in animation lock. Fixed intro cinematic missing audio in German. Fixed an issue of automaton shooting through walls. And bugs where sometimes prerequisite objectives would be shown above primary objective in the HUD. Man, there's a lot to go through here. I'm not gonna lie, I'm gonna skip most of these because they are small other bugs. If you wish to go through more, just check that out. Now, some known issues. Players may not receive friend requests when sent from another platform. Large units have no audio cues, allowing them to sneak up on players. Enemies will try to shoot the generators through the walls in the rescue high-value assets mission. Enemies are sometimes capable of shooting through walls. Social menu is stuck on please wait democratically for some players. Dead bodies of chargers can launch the Helldiver into the air. Stratagem balls bounce unpredictably off cliffs in some spots, and players may be unable to join specific friends or are returned to ship when joined. Those are the top priority ones they are intending to fix. Now, some medium priority ones. Reinforcements may not be available for players when a join in progress. Mines may become invisible or disappear in multiplayer lobbies. That's an issue. I think that's top priority. Pelican 1 may sometimes be launched away if hit with the Impaler Tentacle. Supply packs may be incorrectly used if pressing down on the controller when calling in a stratagem. Friends invite-only games can only be seen in the Galactic War map but not joined. And high-damaged weapons will not detonate hell bombs. Interesting. And some enemies that bleed out do not progress professional orders and eradicate missions. Interesting. But with that, that was 20 minutes of talking that I tried to cut down to at least less than half an hour. But with that, that is a good number of things. So they overhauled anti-tank, so things have more penetration than others. It is not just flat out one rocket. The weapons themselves, lots of weapons and stratagem balancings. Enemy reworks all sound good. Honestly, I freaking hate Impalers. I'm glad to see that they were not, what I heard, not enough from when I watched the patch video, but there was more here, so I'm glad I double-checked the video, or the patch notes itself. Well, with that, my name is Mad Scorpion, and I will see you in the Hell Pods.